So, hello, Kay. Thank you for talking to me. I would like to take you right back to the beginning. What was your background, and was there any theatre in your blood, or are you a rebel?
No, no, I'd love to. I have no idea. I'd love to know whether there was any theatre in my background. My father was a lorry driver, and my mother worked in a laundry. We weren't very rich. I was born in Hull during the war, but brought up in Leeds. And first of all, I wanted to be a ballerina, and I realized I was really bad. So my mom used to let me read out of my storybooks to her, and I used to love that. And my two older sisters, she paid to learn the piano. She said, "What would you like to do?" And I said, "I think I'd like to act." So there was a Leeds College of Music and Drama, just a daily thing, that I used to go to in the evenings for an hour or something, and I loved it. So I decided I wanted to go to drama school, but we couldn't afford it, obviously. So I got a grant from Leeds Education Committee. I have no idea how that happened, but I did, and I got into RADA, and I wanted RADA because at that time it's a bit melodramatic, and I thought if I can't get any acting work, I just don't want to live. So little knowing that how little control one has on the amount of work one gets. Anyway, I went to RADA for 2 years. And I was there with people like Tom Courtney and Sarah Miles. And it was an extraordinary experience. Plus, I was only just 16 when I went.
Now that's
They've
interesting, but because now I think people are encouraged not to go that young.
I think they're right, really. I mean, I think very not long afterwards it went up to 18, which I think is more sensible. And of course, I mean, I did have the money from Leeds Education, but it wasn't a lot. But it paid for me to have some lodgings with a wonderful woman called Mrs. Frost, who looked after me for the 2 years. But sheer fluke. The gods were obviously on my side. And during the summer break, we had long summer breaks, like all universities, and I actually got a job being leading lady at Bradford Court Players, Harry Hanson's Court Players in Bradford. My first role was Gigi.
Wow.
Um, and I did, it was twice nightly, once weekly, so it was very hard work. But I loved it. And then I went back to RADA to finish off. And then came the reality that you can't pick and choose your jobs as much as I thought you would be able to.
Right. And I mean, did 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 being at RADA, do you think then, did they prepare you for the profession, or did you, from what you've alluded, have a slightly false sense of security that was that
No, you never, you never had a sense of security at RADA. People used to be thrown out
oh
if you
really?
didn't reach a certain standard. Yeah, the teachers would all meet. So that in that respect, it was very good training for the toughness of the business. And there was a very high standard. I mean, it was, well, I think it still is one of the best that you can go to.
Yes.
And I have no idea. The gods must have been on my side.
And those, I mean, that was Tom Courtney's year. So was that John Thor's year as well? Because were they
Well, it
around at
would
the
be.
same time? Yeah.
Of course, when you were at RADA, you didn't know these people were going to be famous.
No.
So I can't remember who was there, but you name them of that era. They were at RADA when I was at RADA. I think Peter O'Toole had left 2 years before, and Sean Phillips, of course, got married to him and left 2 years before. You name a lot of the Northern actors went to RADA. It was an extraordinary time. I don't think 16 is young, and I was growing up at the same time. I looked older than I was. I mean, not that I tried, I just did look older, being taller and sensible, I think. And and it was everything I wanted. I visited it, about 6 years ago, 7 years ago. And I just happened to be passing and I popped in and said, could I look round? Yeah. And I realized how rarefied it was, actually. I didn't at the time, I just accepted it.
Mm. Yeah, well, you never appreciate something until it's a bit like, I bet it's a bit like going back to school where everything looks a little bit smaller and
That's right. Well, it looked more impressive. It looked so much more like conservatoire, at the Paris
Mm.
Conservatoire. I hadn't realised the class that I'd become involved in.
One
The
of
class in its smallest.
one of the things that struck me when I look at because you can see sort of RADA years online, and who was the class of 61 or whatever, and a lot of actresses who've got into RADA, which is, as you say, the sort of top of the pile, because of the way that society was in those days. If they meet and fall in love with somebody and get married, that's sort of their career over in many ways, because people started families so young. And that seems extraordinary that you'll have taken that path and then suddenly, the chap goes on to be the breadwinner and the working actor, and the woman sort of has kids and stops, which seems extraordinary.
I did get married
Oh gosh.
when I was 18. I did everything very quickly and very early, I think. And that was the leading man that had been at Harry Hanson's Court Place. He followed me back down to London when I went back to RADA. And we did get married, as I say, when I was just over 18, in fact. And he became a writer. And sadly, he's dead now. But I became interested in the process of writing and how writers worked, which led me on to leave acting and go to work with writers, which I found much more satisfying, strangely. Never thought that would be possible. He wasn't, I think between us, we struggled. Because Patrick always wanted us to work together, which of course is not really possible. Anyway, we did a couple of things together, and then I started to do some television, as you know. And one of the first things, it was Anne Veronica I first did, which was with Christopher Barry, who then cast me as Poppea in Romans.
Well,
that's how.
It's always worth having a director that casts you a lot. In fact, I talked to a director recently who'd worked with an actor she'd not had a good time with, and she said, I should have known, because on his CV he's never worked with the same director twice.
Really,
Said,
that is
that should be
interesting, isn't it?
a warning.
Christopher, he was a great supporter, he was, and he'd cast me the next year in another Doctor Who, and that was Doctor Who and the Savages, which of course has disappeared off the face of the earth.
Sad, yes, nobody indeed.
Knows. Yeah, there isn't a copy. If anybody finds a copy in their attic, it'll be worth a fortune, I should think.
Well, you very kindly gave me the 2 photos you had from it, which nobody had seen for God knows how many years. So you were sitting on a gold mine yourself.
Oh, no, I don't think so. But certainly the tape would be worth a lot, I would.
So with Christopher Barry, was it just a sort of audition, and was that how you met him?
I'd forgotten there was an article in the Doctor Who magazine quite a while ago when Christopher died, and it said there was a side issue that said Special K, which I thought was lovely, and it had written. I had forgotten how I met Christopher, but I was, as you do as an actor, you're right to say, I would love to meet you. Is that possible to come and see you? And I did, and that's when he gave me Anne Veronica, which was the first one I did with him. And then he did cast me about 5 times over a period of years, So that was very nice and really helped. And then I did things like the first Churchills, which wasn't Christopher, and Nana, another classic serial I did. So things were beginning to happen, and I was beginning to take off, but I was frustrated by acting because the belief that you could do anything and get a job, but it's not true. It's a fluke. My letter happened to land on Christopher's desk at that particular time, but it might not have done. And I couldn't have done anything about it. But when I became interested in writers, I started to read scripts on a freelance basis for Pat Sands. You remember her?
Oh, yes.
The Bill.
They later produced The Bill. Yeah, she was married to Philip Bond, wasn't she?
Yeah. And she said to me, "Would you like to read scripts for us?" So I started doing that. I really became interested in that more than in acting. And that led on to other things.
It's interesting that you talk about the sort of frustrations of acting, which I think those stories are the same now as then. But anybody looking at the work that you did in the 60s would go, God, there was so much being made. There was so much work available that there probably isn't to the same extent on television now. Stuff being made at the BBC week in, week out.
Yeah. it,
no, go on,
sorry.
go on.
I was going to say, I mean, I wasn't on the inside, I had no big contacts or anything like that. It was just a fluke
Yeah,
that I managed to keep working. And then, as I say, I think my sister came to, when we were doing Nana, my sister, as I say, my background's not theatrical at all, came and to stay with me for a few days. And she came to the studio. We were all dressed in our beautiful costumes and makeup and everything. And she said, she said, I looked at you and I thought you're all like beautiful butterflies. And if I don't turn on my television, I says, well, you might not have existed. And I thought, she's quite right. I'm killing myself in such an ephemeral world. And then another time, the other thing that opened my eyes was I was playing in the poker session at Richmond Theatre in London with Stephen Murray, and the stage slopes backwards. So Stephen was spieling sort of at the footlights, and I was deep in my character. We're all seated in a circle around him. And I happened to look at the audience and they were all looking up. And I thought, it's a mad world I'm in. And I managed to snap back into the character. But those two things were like light switches.
Yeah, that's it. And that's quite a turnaround from if I don't act, I may as well not.
I know exactly what a travel I'd done in such a short period. So I think
Yeah,
I acted for about 9 years. Yeah.
yeah. And so, what was the? You've sort of talked about the inspiration to change, but what was the practical change that went from sort of performing to going to the other side of the sort of
Well, I mean,
curtain?
Pat gave me the step across, by getting me to read scripts, which obviously it worked. What I was writing, it was analysing them. Just is this good or is this bad, or could this be made to work, and so on. And I found that fascinating. And then other people started to use me as a researcher, and I love research. And it sort of started to take up. I'm just trying to think what the first thing was that I can't remember, but I began to get known for that, and I found more satisfaction. That didn't pay well, but I did get a lot of satisfaction from that. And then, I know, like everything, things seize up, and you get to the cliff edge where there's no money coming, and you think, what am I going to do? I've got rent to pay, and that happens throughout your life, really. Well, when you're acting, it does. And the same thing had happened with reading scripts. And I thought, oh dear, what am I going to do? And then I thought, people who do the most new writing is BBC Radio.
Yeah,
So I wrote to Richard Emerson, and another lucky letter that landed on my desk, and he saw me, and it's a fluke. It's a fluke, and we had a good chat, and then I went back, and I was absolutely broke, and I was demonstrating this cardboard bird which you wound up and let fly. And it was supposed to be based on a Leonardo da Vinci drawing. Anyway, it was getting to Christmas. So I needed this job. And it was in a store not far from where I lived in Ealing. So I wound this darned bird up. I got a crowd around, wound this bird up, let it go. Instead of flying, it fell straight down onto the floor. And a woman from the back of the crowd said, I bought one like that last year and it did exactly the same thing. And I thought, oh, I don't think I could go on. So I walked out
oh
without a
really?
penny. And the phone went. And it was Richard Emerson. And he said, we've got a 6-month contract if you're interested, Kay. I said, yes,
Wow.
I am. And he said, about the money. I said, it doesn't matter. So I haven't lost that, really, have I?
So you were living in because of course I've always associated you with being up north, which is
Well,
unusual, of course.
I did quite a lot of stuff in London. It was wonderful. I did things like oh god, now my brain's going to go with whatchamacallit on such and such a channel. Oh, Anna Karenina. And WGBH were wanting to start their own audio radio theatre as opposed to their television, radio theatre, television theatre. And a lovely lady called Eleanor Stout came over, and she wanted to buy my production of Anna Karenina and launch WBH's first audio. And then they asked, and what she wanted me to go over and direct their first homegrown thing and direct it like we do. Of course, in America, they panport. People are separated; they don't necessarily see each other. So she was fascinated by the way there was interplay. And of course, Anna Karenina is very emotional. So I went over to Boston,
Wow.
and they paid for me, and they launched it with Anna Karenina, and then I directed Edith Wharton's House of Mirth, which was extraordinary experience. And so I had some wonderful experiences, did a lot of classic serials and so on. And then I began to realize that the writing that was drawing me quite a lot was Northern writing. I'm a Northerner, and I understood context, I understood subtext. And so I thought maybe I should move. Well, Alfred Bradley, of course, was there, and he was very encouraging. And he said, "Why don't you move up to well, it was Leeds then, but it became Manchester very quickly." And I thought that's a good idea. And I do like pushing myself. I don't like getting settled and too comfortable. Unfortunately, that's the case. So I talked to London and so on, and they let me transfer my job to Manchester. And that's when I started to do theatre as well. I directed quite a lot of theatre, Oldham and Library Theatre and Wythenshawe when it was still going and so on. I also did theatre in London. I did Soho Poly and so on. And that was amazing to be able to mix like that. And then I thought it would be very interesting to do television. So I asked if I could take the television director's training course. This was after a few years up in Manchester, which they let me do. And so I started doing television, radio, and theatre.
Gosh. Well, it seems odd to ask if you have a preference. I suppose it was the mosaic of doing the different ones that's part of the appeal. But
it was, but I do love radio.
right.
I think it's the most extraordinary. There's no real egos in radio. Nobody knows who you are. That you get the writers and the writer and you get the actors together. You're a group. You can work together closely. You can do that in the theatre, but comes a time when, as a director, you're moving off it, leaving it to the actors once you've put the bricks in place. So I enjoy that. I enjoy it all, yes, but I do love radio. I think it's an extraordinary medium.
Yeah, and of course, because it's done so quickly and so simply, you can the resources available cast wise are extraordinary sometimes, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. And I've worked with amazing people like Paul Schofield. My God, how could you work with anybody better? It was the range. I mean, I can't remember them all now, bless them. But the range of actors you could work with was wonderful. And that moment when you all sit around and do a reading in the green room is wonderful,
yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's fabulous. It's with a heavy. You might have heard this. They've just Media City has just closed its radio studio and made it into a television studio. So the BBC at Media City have no radio studios at all now.
Oh no! So what do they do?
They hire external studios.
Mind you, see, I started to do external recordings because I was interested in the way cinema soundtrack sounds different from radio. I wondered why. And I think the first one I did was Frost in May. I forgot the name of Antonia White, I think, was the writer. Can't remember who dramatized it. And it was set in a convent. And I decided it would be interesting. And in a horse and carriage. Yeah, we ordered a horse and carriage. And it would be interesting because the timing is different, in a theatre or so you pick up cues sometimes quickly or what. There is a different rhythm if you do it in that way. And the other thing I did was binaural.
Yes.
Valerie Winter, a great friend of mine who's a beautiful writer, did this about a woman she listens to her voice, she can hear the world around her, and you hear her speak. So we put binaural mics on, it was Bridget Forsyth actually. And again, if the audience put the headphones on, they should be in her position. So her voice would come in their mind. The nurses or the nuns or whoever were around her would come into the person wearing the headphones. So I often thought it would be quite interesting to do a thriller like that.
Yeah, I did an experiment.
Probably died.
I did an experimental thing, not of that. It was all done in binaural sound. It was a few years ago now, but there's certainly been some interesting experiments done in that way to try
Yeah,
and radicalize how drama's presented
yeah,
and not get in a rut of everything sounding the same.
absolutely. I think one of the problems was that not everybody could hear in that perspective. With some people, the binaural sound was behind them, and I think that was, I don't think it was to do with technicals, I'm not sure, but I just did about 3 or 4 of those. But I mean, it just widened the scope a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. No, I
Mm.
think radio is extraordinary. But with your director's hat on and working with actors, having been an actor, and you've alluded to the sort of uncertainty and the rejection, you're suddenly the person that's having to do the rejecting, in the sense that you must, as a director, you're suddenly in a position. How did you take to that, having been on the other side of it?
First of all, I have enormous respect for actors because it's a hell of a job, and it's one that's totally necessary. The play can't happen without the actor. I always made sure that they were treated very, very politely. I have enormous respect. If, something that happened to me when I was still acting was it was the first Churchill's, and I played Lady Henrietta Wentworth, the Duke of Monmouth's wife or girlfriend or mistress, I can't remember which. And he died, and she had this really big scene where she was distressed, obviously, and so on. And I was pleased with it, so I wrote to everybody to say, please listen, and they cut it.
Oh,
Well, it happens, and one of the things I've made sure I do is that if ever I have to cut somebody out, I let them know, and I let them know why.
a, a friend of mine turned up with a date to the premiere of a film he was in, where he played the lead character in flashback and in dream sequences, and he very enthusiastically introduced his date to the director, who went as white as a sheet and said, have they not told you the film was overrunning? We got rid of all of the dream sequences and all of that, and he wasn't in the
Oh,
film
yeah.
at all anymore.
Oh God, that's much worse than mine. Yeah. Oh,
But not.
and so I'm very, very aware. But I mean, I don't treat anybody roughly. As I say, I've got too much respect, and we need them. We need actors.
Well, and when we look back now at not just television but society as a whole, it has, at the time that you were doing it, female, the acting profession for women was, you know parts were restricted the way that society was, etc., but for directors as well, there weren't many female directors. So how
No,
conscious were you, and how did it affect your work that you were one of a sort of smaller group, if you like, of people doing what you did?
well, to be honest, I wasn't aware of it. I mean, I'm a person first and foremost. I've always found that if I know what I want and I know how to get it from people, cameras, lighting, I don't know physically how to do it, but I can say that's the look I'm after, or that's what I'm after, or what I'm trying to achieve is this. As long as you know what you're doing, you don't dither. You get respect, and it doesn't matter whether you're male, female, or a pussycat. You get respect, and so luckily, I think I've always known my mind. And if somebody comes up with a different idea that's better, I'll take it. I'm not proud. My first fear when I started directing in television was that I wouldn't be able to talk to cameras because, of course, I'd worked with actors, I'd worked with writers, with lighting, costume, but I'd never worked with anybody on cameras. Not a problem at all. I always thought it might be difficult for me to communicate. Not one bit. Because I wouldn't say press that button, use that lens, or I'm not that way inclined. But as I say, if you know what you want and you know when you've got it, I think that's the main thing as well. Don't keep trying. Don't do 24 takes because you're not totally sure. Because
Yeah.
they know you've got it in take two.
Well, and of course, as an actor, you always look at directors and casting directors and think, well, they're the ones in power, and I'm dependent on them for a job. But of course, as a director, you have to put yourself out there and hustled and try and get work. So, and you worked a lot in television across lots of different shows. So how quickly did you sort of establish yourself, and did that work sort of propagate itself?
quite a lot. The one job that I did do, which I have never liked, is producing. I hate it because it estranges me from the people that I really enjoy working with, which is the crew and the writers and the actors. And there's an ego thing which I don't understand. And I produced the regurgitation, if that's the right word, not Brookside. I did Brookside, but not as a producer. Crossroads. So I restarted Crossroads after it had closed for X number of years. Didn't enjoy the experience. I did Sunburn in Cyprus as a producer. Didn't enjoy it at all. I don't understand the job, to be honest. If you've got your writer, you should be able to get on with it. Your writer, your director, your actors, those are the people that matter. And as long as you've been chosen because they think you can do it as a director, then you should, obviously, it's good to have a caring producer who says, do you think you've got a shot missing there? So it's always useful to have that. But how many executive producers are there on things now? It must be a nightmare because everybody will have a different point of view.
Yeah.
And you have to, I mean, I didn't have that, but only ever had one producer, one exec. But I don't know what you do if you've got 5 people all having money in the product.
Well, and directors can't even do their own casting anymore, really, can they? It's they can say who they prefer, but it goes upstairs.
I know. Now I've been lucky, really. Is it just go upstairs? Yeah. And I've managed. I mean, one of the brilliant things for me was Coronation Street because I'd over a period of 20 years, I directed a lot of Coronation Streets. Apparently,
yeah. Do you know how many episodes? I'm going to tell you. Do you know how many episodes you directed of Coronation Street? 259.
Good God, really?
Yeah.
But of course, that wasn't solid. There were gaps when I went to do Sunburn or went off to do Merseybeat or something like that, So it wasn't all solid. It was over a period of 20 years, I believe.
So, but why was it that you obviously had an aptitude for that show because you kept going back and they kept asking you back. So what was it that made you in that show particularly simpatico?
Marvelous writing. Marvelous. In those days, particularly marvelous writing and superb actors. I don't watch it so much now, so I can't review it now. I don't know, but all things change. And I was lucky to be there at some extraordinary times. I mean, the death of Haley, my goodness me, that was one of the most moving things I've ever done in my life. I'll never forget that. And I killed off so many people. Mike Baldwin, you name him, I probably killed them.
you were the harbinger of doom, were you? You were the Grim Reaper.
I must have been. Yeah.
Was Haley's last episode your last? Is that the one you bowed out on, or did you?
Oh no, it wasn't. No, it wasn't my last. No, but it was the one I remember. One of the most. She and David together.
Yeah. They're amazing actors.
Well, they're theatre actors, and they know how to time and to build and so on. So the way I decided to do it was I took all their scenes and we had a read through. And then I blocked it, you know what I mean, by moves and things like that. So I blocked those scenes with just them. Then I got the crew in. We didn't act it, we just blocked it with the crew in. Then I got the actors to go and rest, and I brought stand-ins in so that the crew could practice their shots, their tracks, their high shots, their low shots, and we could see if there's any problem. Because I said, I don't want to do any retakes. I want it in their hands, in the actors' hands. I want them to build because their instincts were so good and so right. And that's what we did. And I must say, the television studio, it was just such an atmosphere because everybody knew it was very, very special.
But that's incredibly rare. And as you say, the end results were absolutely phenomenal. So it seems odd that it's incredibly rare to do that kind of thing these days,
Well, it was you were able to because it was written in that way. I can't remember who wrote the scripts now. That's what's so awful. But they built, and you could take those scenes out and just run them as one, as it were. I mean, you did have breaks; you didn't just run them all as one. But yeah, and I was really very pleased with that. It was a gamble
Mm.
because if they lost their nerves or they'd lost their place, but I knew they wouldn't.
Well, it paid off. It was fantastic. I mean, do you mind talking about a big event that happened to you when you were directing Corrie that hit the news? When you were you hit by a unit car or something?
Yes, I was. I was standing on the cobbles outside the Duckworths, virtually, in the garage, and looking at my script. I can't remember who was leaning against the car. Somebody was in there, and they wanted to just angle the car slightly differently to stop a boom reflection. So I was looking at my script, and I suddenly heard this noise and looked up, and this car was heading towards me at the rate of knots. And it caught me in the middle of my stomach and picked me up on its bonnet. Now, in the old Coronation Street, the pavement was quite high. And I think the driver knew that, drove it. I mean, I could have been crushed against the Duckworths if it had, but anyway, it hit the pavement and I flew off and fell in the recovery position on my right-hand side with my left arm over. He managed to turn the car and was going to head for the wall outside the medical centre. And luckily it went bang. Anyway, I think everybody thought I was dead. And I wasn't. And one of the props guys came up. He said, I was the first there. He said, I thought you were dead. Anyway, they got an ambulance, they got the police. It was very painful. And humour is always there, isn't it? The police went around saying to the ambulance men, can we have your name and address, please, for the, you're an actor. And they said, no, that's the real thing. We are the ambulance that was sent for. So I got into it. And it was, it had smashed all the right-hand side of my arm. And my left leg, which had come over, and the knee had been broken. So anyway, the street looked after me, and I went into hospital. I was there for a while, but it was trying to walk around because I had a crutch under my right arm, and on my left, I needed a crutch for the leg. So it was I couldn't really walk properly for a while. But anyway, bless them, they kept my job open. Well, I was always freelance, so. But oh, and the headline that was, I think, was in the Daily Mail said "horror on the cobbles," and I thought that's me.
I remember reading about it in the papers at the time. It made all the papers, and I've got a feeling it was around that time because I think we were supposed to meet then because the first ever DVD commentary I did was on the Romans, and I think you were supposed to be there, and Christopher Barry said, "Oh, she was supposed to be here today, but she's been run over," kind of thing. So did you well, let's, as that's taken us briefly back to Doctor, did you keep in touch with Christopher even when you stopped acting? Were you friends for life?
Oh yes, we did. Yeah, I didn't see him because I was up in Manchester and he was down in London. But yeah, we kept in touch. Yeah.
And did you, when you were directing, were there things that directors that you'd worked for in television did that you learnt from, consciously or unconsciously?
I'm not sure. I really don't know. I'm sure you absorb. You're bound to, aren't you?
Yeah.
I don't like bullies. That's for sure.
Well, somebody who gets, I will have to talk to you about Doctor Who. Somebody who gets a bad press is William Hartnell, who I think sometimes people get confused with his Doctor. But what do you have many memories of working with him?
Well, I mean, I liked him. He was very, very kind to me. He knew I was a newbie. I always remember, what was the producer's name?
Verity Lambert.
Verity. It was Bill's birthday, and she'd arranged for all the stars to go out to Bertorelli's. And Bill insisted that she included me, which I thought was so sweet. And he was very, very kind. And yes, he was irascible, but I didn't see any badness in him. And he did have a good sense of humor. I mean, they used it in Doctor Who and the Romans, definitely.
Oh, it's very funny. I watched it the other day. It's great fun. And Derek Francis is a hoot.
What an honor to be working with people like that, you know. Yeah.
So is he considered a quite a bit? Would he have been quite a big booking for a show like Doctor Who? Somebody like Derek Francis at that time?
Oh
Because
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yes, he was. Yeah.
And then and the the BBC had a kind of we tend to, I think, romanticize, don't we, a little bit the fact that when the BBC was making stuff in house, you could do something like the Romans because they had pillars in a warehouse somewhere, they had costumes in stock and all of that. Do you think we've lost something in that the BBC doesn't have that monopoly anymore? Or as somebody that's worked in commercial television, do you think actually better stuff is made in a more competitive environment?
I don't like competition, but the I think, I mean, when you look at the so Doctor Who's, my goodness me, you know, they are dated, and look at what they're doing now. And I think that's amazing, absolutely astonishing. So I don't, they're different worlds, really. I don't see how you can compare them.
No.
I don't think, you know, I think standards are very, very high now. Well, I think they were then, but within a limited time. After all, you couldn't do retakes in those days because it was too expensive on film, shooting on film. It was too expensive. And I remember in Doctor Who, the Romans, we used to run up and down a corridor. It was the same corridor. We used to turn around and run back again. But a lot of people have got an affection for it.
Yeah, well, doing farce in a tiny BBC studio is quite, because essentially it's a farce, isn't it? It's lots of herring about.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. But I
but
mean, things have changed so much, you can't compare.
no. But it was interesting what you said about your sister saying, all this effort's gone into something that if you don't watch it, it's gone. And that's what happened
Mm.
with the Savages. I mean, it was on and now it's gone. Uh,
Exactly. And as I say, so many people would love to find it, but I don't suppose they ever will.
well, you never. Well, there's. It's
No, strange things happen.
what keeps us going, Kay. It's what
Well,
keeps us.
I think somebody thought they discovered it in the attic in South Africa or something like that. That was one rumor I heard,
Yes,
but I don't think.
Doctor Who missing episode rumors are abound, and it's what keeps us going. But
Yeah.
what do you remember of that one? Because obviously it's probably one of the least known Doctor Who stories because there's
Oh,
nothing of it at all. Have you got sort of goldy
yeah.
kind of silvery makeup on? It looks
Yeah,
like.
we had a silvery makeup. Yes, because we were supposed to be pure and lovely, and of course we weren't. We were horrible.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah. I
Well,
mean, the one of the things that I remember about it was I was killed. I was shot.
oh yes, of course you were. You only
About
make it to episode 2.
yeah, yeah.
It's you and an actor called Robert Sidaway, who I think you did a Z cast with as well.
Yes. Yeah, somebody wrote to me about Robert to say he was in America, I think. They were doing an article about him. And could I remember anything about him? And I couldn't, not that he wasn't good or anything, but I couldn't remember a great deal.
Well,
I
it's
don't
a
know whether he got.
yeah. I'm afraid you
Mm.
both did. You were called Avon and Flower, which which
I
are
was called Flower. I remember that. Yeah. Oh dear.
names to
Quite a
wrestle with.
fantasy. Was it Derek Hodnott? Was it Derek Hodnott who wrote that script?
No, it was Ian Stewart Black.
Ian Stewart Black. That's right.
Yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
because of course that brings us to the fact that you had that you developed this interest in writing, um, and you worked on as an actor on people's scripts. You worked as a director on people's scripts, and then did you write for pleasure before you um, sort of concentrated on it once you'd stopped directing? I mean, have you got are you somebody with lots of notebooks at home with half form scrawled ideas, or
No, I actually have written a novel, um, which is set in Edwardian times. It's a crime novel. And I wrote it because it came out of research I did years ago into women who committed crimes in Victorian times. And the series was called Wicked Women. But it didn't use this particular idea, which I thought was a superb story. I changed it, moved it to Edwardian times, and created a different background for her and a different background for the other character in the novel. And so I did do it, but it took me a long time because I kept having to do other work.
Well, no, that's because that's what I was leading up to, because I plugged your book, I think, in Doctor Who magazine, and but I wondered if you'd been writing prior to, or that just came out of a very long process. Did it? I wondered if you'd turned to writing once you'd stopped directing, or if it was something that was always on the.
I did. I wrote a couple of I did try to write a couple of documentaries for BBC Radio 4, historical fact, because I was interested in using the words of the actual people without having a narrator interfere with it. And there was the Murder of Sir Thomas Overbury in the Tower, which I wrote. I can't remember the other one. It was one of the George's brothers, but I can't remember much about it. And then I did try a couple of novels, which were not very good. And they were historical. I loved research, you see. And then this one took a lot of work, because I started looking at it from one point of view as the participant in the novel, and then realized that wasn't the right way to go into it. It was a different angle I needed. Took a lot of work, but I'm pleased with it. Got some nice reviews, so that's good.
Yeah, well, yes. Well, you've got a chance to plug it now. So tell the listeners all about it.
Well, I won't go into detail, but it's called The Trial of Marie Montrecourt, who was brought up in France, but in an English convent, and her father was an aristocrat and nobody wanted her to be known, so they arranged for her to marry a businessman in Ilkley, a nice middle class guy. Well, not very nice, actually. And the whole thing goes wrong. What I wanted to show was how her life was manipulated. She never realized, she didn't know anything about her background. Her mother died when she was born. She was brought up in this convent. Her father paid the convent to keep her there until she was 18. And then he paid for her to come back and marry this man whom he'd very briefly met. Her life, it was just at a time when women's movement was beginning, when the Labour Party movement was beginning to happen. So things were changing. But sadly for Marie, it couldn't change for her enough or quickly enough. So you can see her life. You can see the things that are happening, because you saw this, what was her brother, actually, illegitimate though she was. He was her brother. He was the son of the aristocrat. He begins to uncover his father's real past. His father, who fought in the Boer War, and who died. And he began to uncover something about this woman, Marie. And he tracks her down. And it's just the way things just miss. And as the audience, as a reader, you can see it all happening, but you can't warn her. You can't tell her. And so there's that involvement.
And how did you find Stephen Moffat, who ended up being a showrunner Doctor Who, I think says, having written is marvelous, but writing is torture, I think, or something along that. You know, the joy is in the achievement of doing it, but the doing it is quite hard.
No, I love the doing it, because I like to go back and make it better, As I say, a lot of rewriting. And I had some very good writer friends who were very honest with me, and I was very grateful for that. No, I think the hardest thing is once you've written it, how the hell do you sell it if you're not famous? It's very hard. It's very hard. But I still get little trickles through, so that's good.
Good. Well, hopefully you'll get a few trickles after this. I'm conscious of your time, but do you? So we'll round up. Do you watch much now? Do you miss it? And do you think, as somebody that's made television, again, we get very rose-tinted spectacles. I think, are you happy with a lot of what you see on the telly?
I think there's some very good things, some brilliant actors, some superb actors. But there's good and bad in all things. But I think standards are high, yes. I don't miss it, and I'm amazed I don't miss it. Well, I didn't have, when I say I didn't have much of a life, I did, but I didn't have time to socialize, see people, talk to them much. You know what I mean? And I'm doing that now, which is nice. Talking to you is lovely.
Oh, well, bless you. Well, I will say goodbye properly, but for the purposes of the interview part of this, Kay Patrick, thank you very much.
Thank you.